Somehow, oh, I hit the table. Somehow we're in the 2020s and the subs versus dubs battle rages on. And there are valid arguments on both sides. Hearing the original Japanese voice actors with English subtitles allows for more nuanced language and keeps the creator's intent front and center. But swapping English voices makes the content more accessible and can draw in audiences that might not watch it with subtitles. We're not here to debate whether subs or dubs are better though, because let's face it, it's largely preference. And if you don't want to use the English dub, you don't have to in most cases. We're here to explore something more tricky: translation, localization, and why AI might be the thing that changes how we consume anime for the better. We're focusing on Japanese to English translation in this video, but translation and localization go well beyond anime. Netflix now offers many of its shows in a variety of languages with both subtitled and dubbed versions. How they vary is really interesting. For now though, we'll keep our attention on anime because, for one, it has some of the most well-researched and famous examples of both good and bad translations, but also because I'm just a huge anime weeb. So here we go, my pride and joy. So what is the difference between translation and localization? Well, in simple terms, translation is the act of converting one language to another as directly as possible. For example, the word sorry or forgive me in English translates to gomen in Japanese. It's a direct one-to-one translation. If you expand it to the phrase I'm sorry, it becomes gomen nasai. Already, we're seeing the two languages differ because of their structure. If you were to translate I'm or I am, it would be watashi wa, but you wouldn't say watashi wa gomen. Now, I only speak conversational Japanese, so you'll have to forgive any translation mistakes we make in this video, but for an experienced speaker, translating the two languages is possible. There will just need to be some concessions made. Unlike translation, localization is the act of conveying the meaning of one's language to another. That's a really broad definition, so stick with me here. Because of the ways that both languages and cultures differ, it's impossible to directly translate everything that we say. It simply wouldn't make sense to most viewers. We need to use localization to both change the language to make sense structurally, as we saw just now, but also to provide context for local audiences to understand the full meaning through context. If you think about how often sarcasm and humor are misunderstood when we're messaging people online, when we're already speaking the same language, imagine how difficult it is to not only translate text, but to attempt to get across the original meaning, all within the same amount of time, and it needs to sync up to the animation on the screen. This is where we run into a lot of the problems that fans of anime have with localization. Many feel that localization waters down the original content, losing the nuance and cultural identity. By simplifying the language used, localization often drops parts of the Japanese language that make it so unique. In English, and specifically here in North America, we don't often use honorifics. You might refer to a teacher as Miss Gonzales, but we tend to call most people here by their given names. In Japanese culture, as many of you may know, honorifics are used in place of names in many cases. Teachers, older students, family members, and even friends have honorifics attached to them. The act of calling someone by their first name without an honorific is generally only done by family members and really close to loved ones. This is the first level of localization, contextualizing relationships and settings. We don't need to call the teacher Gonzales sensei to understand that she's a teacher. We can get it from the context of seeing her in the classroom. But other honorifics and titles aren't so straightforward. So, for example, we don't have a direct translation for sama, an honorific that shows a high level of respect. There's no one-to-one translation. So instead, to get across that someone is using formal language and showing respect to the person that they are speaking to, context needs to be added to the dialogue. Basically, when simple translations don't exist, it's up to the localization team to get across the original meaning using what language we have available. That can be handled in a number of ways, performance being one of them. But it's up to localizations teams to figure out how to best handle this. The second level of localization comes into play when idioms are used. It's amazing how much of the language you use comes in the form of idioms. And by their definition, an idiom is a group of words whose meaning can't be understood by their individual words. So if I say, the grass is greener, or even the full phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side, you likely know what I'm saying, like that other people's lives are better than my own. It's a proverb that dates back centuries that refers to crops. But Without the context and without being a native English speaker, for example, it would be difficult to parse its meaning, especially in the shorthand. Localizers need to be able to either find similar idioms in the other language, find a way to explain the meaning of the idiom through the dialogue, or change the sentence entirely to at least fit the tone. Even if the words directly translate, there are many phrases that simply won't make sense without additional context. Now, the third, and possibly the most controversial level of localization, comes in the form of cultural experience. One aspect of anime that many people love is getting to experience Japanese culture. As a collectivist culture, it differs from North American culture in many ways that appeal to some people who don't identify with the individualism found here. There's also a long history in Japan that isn't present here. And both of these things permeate through every aspect of anime, from the relationships to the way that conflict is handled, and so much more. We've already talked a little bit about how depicting the Japanese language can be tricky when translating it due to the differences in language. But there's another barrier to overcome. Just as Japanese culture is different from American culture is different from Mexican culture, which is different from Ukrainian culture, which is different from Filipino culture, and so on. Localizing for an American audience is essentially putting anime through an American filter. Thankfully, there are sometimes multiple languages available on anime, so you'll see German, Spanish, French, and Mandarin available on larger anime such as Attack on Titan. But for smaller productions, the studios usually can't afford to translate the show into multiple languages, let alone regions that speak the same language. So what we end up with is one English version for the entire world. This isn't something new. As the largest English-speaking country in the world, the US has become the main market for anime and most other media, and so that means that they'll be the target for localization. Many of us are familiar with American media, so it's not a leap to suddenly try to understand American phrasing and views. But imagine if there was a local version for every country, and we could actually land closer to the creator's intent instead of using the broadest strokes possible. Localization is a tool to give the best experience possible to audiences, but the challenge localization teams face is immense, especially when a show is deeply rooted in Japanese culture and nuanced relationships that need to be conveyed to an audience in a different language. There's no easy answer on how to best handle it. AI could present one possible solution. We're already seeing how artificial intelligence is transforming real-time translation, like the Samsung Galaxy S24 earlier this year. You can have a conversation over the phone and it will translate your voice for the other person and vice versa. Insane. AI could allow us to localize content we're watching without the high costs involved with translation. It will be able to use your local language, cultural touch points, and so much more. That's not to take away the work of localization teams. They will still absolutely be needed to make sure that the intent and the creative elements remain intact. But instead, it will lighten the load and allow their work to reach more people. Or we could go back to the days of fan subs where we'd have paragraphs of yellow text explaining what baka means. I'm Carmela Gonzales. Thanks so much for watching The Tech Effect. We'll see you soon.